All right, ladies and gentlemen, my name is John Rushemeza. Welcome to this edition of the Counterrevolution Podcast. Today, we're going to continue venturing down to talk about critical pedagogy. I discussed critical pedagogy already on this podcast and in my writings in a number of occasions. Discussed a person named Paulo Freire on a number of occasions. And so today we're just going to continue down that path. I found an article or a paper or something from it appears a think tank. I think it's a Jewish think tank. It's called NAVI, NAVI.org, North American Values Institute. So NAVI values.org. They, according to their website, their kind of mission is to empower parents to promote American civic value and counter ideological extremism in K through 12. According to them, quote, at NAVI, we champion American civic values, freedom, opportunity, and unity. We believe every child deserves an education rooted in these principles, free from divisive ideology. What they do is that they empower parents and advocates and promote real-world solution and work to ensure K through 12 education remains focused on unity, excellence, and equal opportunity for all students. So it is a think tank that is meant to be somewhat organized. I've never heard of them. Apparently, it was founded in 2021, so it's not that old, as a Jewish Institute for Liberal Values. NAVI was originally focused on the growing imposition of radical social justice ideology inside and outside the Jewish community. Within a year, it became clear that the most important and under-addressed front in the spread of extremist ideology and rising anti-Semitism was the K-12 education system. In response, quote, we focused our mission and relaunched as North American Values Institute, dedicated to restoring academic integrity, open inquiry, and free expression in American schools. Now, of course, before I continue, as you can hear, their goal is not necessarily my goal, in the sense that we share a goal. Make no mistake, we both want to expose what's happening in the government schools. But my ultimate end is to put the government school out of business, at least as far as it has to do with Christian children. For Jewish children, they can decide if they want to try to reform the system. My vision and the vision of those who are kind of with me in this is that we are not looking to preserve or reform the government school. So my goal here, I'm going to use their information that they provided to the degree that I agree with it. But just wanted to make that clear. I don't know much about this organization to endorse it. So far, what they're saying as their values and goals are noble. So, but again, the ultimate ends for me and for us, the people that that are on my side, we do not think that parents should be sending their children to this institution. So, for example, what we would say here is, their goal is to empower parents to promote civic values and counter ideological extremism. Well, that's good, but this system is designed to go there. The more the culture becomes ideologically extreme, the more the system. Case in point, it's going to be our subject for today, Paulo Freire. And so they here wrote an article, which, as you can see on the screen, is titled From Theory to Classroom, Paulo Freire's Influence on K-12. Executive Summary. This report examines the enduring influence of Paulo Freire, the Brazilian educator best known for Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Freire argued that education should serve as a tool for political liberation, teaching students to recognize oppression and mobilize for social change. Over time, these ideas have become institutionalized in teachers' preparation programs in K-12 classrooms, where critical consciousness and activism are often treated as central educational goals. Freire's influence helps explain why schools continue to produce active-based educators, underscoring the urgent need to reestablish the classroom's core purpose, including equipping students with the knowledge and skills they need to thrive. As I've said elsewhere, the system was designed to eventually go this way. The system, once you decided that government was going to be in charge and in control of the system, right? You definitely politicize the system. So the public school system, the government school system, is political from the start. And if something is political, it becomes an ideological battleground. That's what a lot of people do not understand. And so, yes, the system changes hands from the people such as Horsemen and others, the reformers, who then hand it off to the progressives, enter people like John Dewey. And John Dewey inevitably, because of their godless philosophies, paved the way and handed off to the radical pedagogues. So, who was Paulo Freire? Paulo Freire, according to this article, 1921, 1997, was a Brazilian professor and author who argued that education should function as a tool of political liberation rather than knowledge acquisition. So, according to this article, he encouraged students to recognize and collectively act against their own oppression in order to gain freedom from their oppressors. He was, after a coup in 1964, he was imprisoned for subversion. And he was exiled to Chile. There, he went to Cambridge, Massachusetts, where he worked as a visiting professor. Interesting, isn't it? And had the chance to share his ideas more broadly. He then worked in Geneva for a decade as the special education advisor to the World Congress of Churches. This allowed him to travel and implement his ideas in developing countries. He ultimately returned to Brazil, where he became a minister of education for the city of Sao Paulo. Now, Minister of Education, a lot of people in America might not understand, but in other places, what here we have as departments, Department of Education, Department of Agriculture, Department of Defense. In other countries, they call a ministry of Defense, and therefore the Secretary of Education will be known as the Minister of Education. The Secretary of Defense will be known as the Minister of Defense. So his educational framework. Paulo is best known for his 1968 book, 1968. That's the year that a lot of things went bad in this country and around the world. But 1968, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, according to writer Saul Stein, the book has achieved near iconic status in American teachers' training programs and is considered essential reading for future educators. It remains one of the most cited social science books of all time, ensuring that it continues to shape teacher preparations in the United States. Now, if you check out the video that I did recently explaining a critical pedagogy, which is the educational philosophy that he basically outlines as the model which the book introduces, and that is later developed out of the book. In there, I quoted someone else from the Harvard Library or something, who said that the book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, is canonical, meaning, like it says here, is essential and has reached an iconic status. Just keep in mind that this is someone that, as we already pointed out up here, who argued that education should serve as a tool for political liberation, teaching students to recognize oppression, mobilize for social change. Now, it's critical theory. So it's not necessarily finding real oppression. It's picking out certain things and saying that's oppression. For example, heteronormativity, which is just traditional gender roles and gender understanding of gender as male and female, and that they're different and that you can't change to become a female. If you're born male, you can change to become male. That kind of understanding, that's oppression, according to critical theory. So they're not necessarily exposing actual oppression. And sometimes they do. Sometimes they'll expose actual injustice. But the goal is to challenge traditional norms. Pave the way for a new world order, a Marxist revolution. It's a Marxist system of education. So, to continue here, we are on page 2. So, we're continuing with his educational framework. We already pointed out that the book has achieved iconic status and is considered essential reading for future educators. One of the things that book points out, and I am in the middle of reading or listening to the audiobook. In chapter 2, I have read chapter 2 already, and now I'm re-listening to it, but I've read it. In chapter 2, that's where he really explains and kind of irons out his view of things with regards to education. And that's why he talks about something called the banking model of education. Okay? So, according to this article here, it says Freire rejected what he called banking education, in which teachers treat students as passive recipients of information. He argued that this approach was patronizing and designed to keep oppressed people down, basically to maintain the status quo, right? And they quote from the book here saying, quote, in the banking concept of education, knowledge is a gift bestowed by those who consider themselves knowledgeable upon those who they consider to know nothing. Projecting an absolute ignorance onto others, a characteristic of the ideology of oppression, negates education and knowledge as a process of inquiry. Before I go anywhere, people tend not to point this out, but I recently heard someone else that pointed out the fact that Freire was not teaching small children when he was an educator. Okay, now he's pushing these ideas for all education, and that's a kind of a deception on his part. I don't know. I haven't engaged with him close enough to see if he was clear elsewhere. But I was listening to another guy that seemed to know a lot more than I do about Paulo Freire, and he was saying that a lot of people reject Freire's comment there because in their minds, yeah, small children don't know anything. You're trying to teach them. You actually, you know, as an adult, and they know nothing as children, or at least very little with regards to the subject. So, for example, when we're teaching our daughter who is 5 years old math, simple math, she don't know anything. She doesn't understand any of it. She's getting this information from scratch, right? But this guy was saying that, well, he was saying that because he's teaching adults. He was teaching, one of his things over there in Brazil and elsewhere was that he was teaching the peasants who did not know how to read and write. He was teaching them how to read and write so they can better understand what's happening and be able to advocate for themselves. So in that sense, he understood education in that context as liberation, right? So that you're trying to teach people how to read so that they can be able to read the news, read the headlines, they can be able to vote, right? Know what they're doing. They can be able to, advocate for themselves and do other things. You know, it's obvious that if you know how to read, you're able to do more than someone that don't know how to read. That's just simple fact. But again, the book never stops to say, well, this is best for adults. Should, to at a certain level, small children don't know. So what they've done is they've applied this, taken these concepts, most of them, they're teaching them to teachers, colleges, to people who are going out to teach small children. Again, either way, it's where it begins and its ultimate ends is off. So we're not even gonna act like we're trying to redeem any of it. Now, there are some things that can be redeemed, but not much. Anyway, so he rejected the banking model of education. He thought that this is just a way that the oppressed maintain the status quo because it's easy to indoctrinate people who don't understand, who you consider not to understand anything when you present yourself as an expert and tell them to just shut up and listen to you. Ironically, this is what leftists do today. They always cite an expert to shut you down. But the article continues. So he rejected the banking model, blah, blah, blah. Instead, Freire believed that education should, at its core, be a tool for collective social change, to break what he called the culture of silence. He promoted conscientization, analyzing social reality, acting to change it. According to the Freire Institute, which I quoted as well in my recent video, Conscientization is the process of developing a critical consciousness for the social and political forces that shape our lives and developing the critical thinking skills to challenge injustice and create change. This is not simply an intellectual process or a moment of enlightenment, but one that presupposes an ongoing commitment to action. Nor is it an individual process. We discover and seek to change reality through a collective activity. The article continues, conscientization is more commonly known as critical consciousness, or what I would say, achieving a critical consciousness. Within this framework, any lesson from math to English can be used to teach students to activate for change. They're going to say, because pedagogy of the oppressed is so widely assigned in education schools, many new teachers enter the classroom viewing their purpose as advancing social change rather than the transfer of knowledge and skills. The book holds that the oppressed must be taught to understand and rebel against their circumstances. The central thesis of the book, in Freire's words, is as follows, quote, and I'm quoting the whole article, so I didn't say anything of my own words there, but they're quoting now from Pedagogy of the Oppressed, quote, it is only when the oppressed find the oppressor out and become involved in the organizing struggle for their liberation that they begin to believe in themselves. This discovery cannot be purely intellectual, but must involve action. Nor can it be limited to mere activism, must include serious reflection. Teachers who come out of these colleges, many of them are activists, they're evangelists, and they see themselves as on a mission to change the world through education. And not because they're going to teach the students to learn their subject and master their subject and understand themselves as God intended. No. They want their students to join in the revolution. They're raising up revolutionaries. That's the goal. That's why you see a lot of walkouts where students are walking out of class to go and protest some injustice, holding up signs, doing all these things. It's that's what the education is for. This is the most important thing right now. Yes, the reading and writing and math is down. The schools are down. Terrible. But activism and engagement in whenever there's an uprising demanding social change, they get an A plus, every one of those students. Having a critical consciousness, basically becoming woke, they get an A. And that's what's most important to these activists and evangelists. All right. The article continues. In Freire's worldview, society is divided into two groups. Again, Marxism, neo-Marxism. Society is divided into two groups, the oppressed and the oppressed. This binary leaves little room for norms, fostering division and encouraging illiberal ways of thinking. By framing social relations as a moral struggle between two groups, Freire's framework invites students to see the world in absolutes. He argues that the oppressed must liberate both themselves and their oppressors. Though the ultimate purpose of this liberation remains unclear, given his view of the oppressor class as irredeemably corrupt by power. They're going to say Freire argues that the oppressed may not be fully aware of their situation, so they must be told. Their perception of themselves as oppressed is impaired by their submersion in the reality of oppression. Once they are told that they are oppressed, they must be made to choose whether to act or to remain as they were. Okay? Yeah, they go on to kind of acknowledge Freire's impact, and the fact that, of course, he um, was a Marxist. To say, quote, Freire derides one of the fundamental values of Western society. They believe that personal effort, innovation, and risk-taking can lead to a better life. His framework is explicitly rooted in Marxism. We already knew that. According to a long-time comrade of Freire, writing in Jacobin, Freire was decidedly Marxist and viewed capitalist education as reproducing the social relations of a dominating, exploitative social order, and as an ideological veil channeling human solidarity into false narratives of individual hard work, reward, and progress. Freire's Marxist orientation was integral to his vision of education. His conviction that education must reveal the oppressed to the extent of their exploitation draws directly from Marx's concept of force consciousness, the idea that the subjugated class adapts the values and beliefs of its oppressor, thereby perpetuating its own subjugation. Okay, so then they proceed to talk about how critical pedagogy was popularized in the United States, the popularization of critical pedagogy in the United States. Quote, Freire's ideas quickly spread beyond Brazil, inspired educators who sought to align teaching with social and political change. Remember, what is not mentioned yet, I don't know if they will, is the fact that John Dewey had paved the way. John Dewey had created the perfect conditions at Columbia University for the Frankfurt School to bring in their wicked doctrines of demons, which is critical theory. And Paulo Freire and all these other guys are basically offsprings of byproducts of that. So John Dewey started the job and they took over. All right, let's start over. Freire's quote, Freire's ideas quickly spread beyond Brazil and inspired educators who sought to align teaching with social and political change. Scholars such as Henry Giroux, our friend, a close collaborator and translator of Freire, helped introduce and popularize Freire's ideas with American audiences. Giroux contextualized Freire's work for the United States and elaborated on its Marxist foundation. Amid the social upheaval of the late 60s and early 70s, many educators found this new model to be more relevant to the times, viewing mastery and banking education as overly rigid. Freire's framework, which emphasized critical consciousness, student empowerment, and questioning of societal power structure, also inspired teachers to adopt a more participatory approach to learning, one that blurred the lines between instructor and student and redefined the aims of education itself. And I would argue that even that was really started by kind of a progressive kind of education. But these guys came in and dressed it up appropriately with Marxism and took it as far as they have. But progressive education had started, the progressive philosophy of education had already paved the way. And yes, progressive education does blur the lines between instructor and student. It is student focused, student centered, child centered. Anyway, continue. Quote, Giroux situated Freire's idea within a neo-Marxist analysis of how institutions and power structures in culture, including education, produce social inequality in a capitalist society. Giroux taught teachers that they were devalued and distilled in existing systems. He urged them to see themselves as transformative intellectuals who should fight for producing and legitimizing various political and economic and social interests through the pedagogy that they endorse and utilize. He argued that education is inherently political and therefore schools and teachers should not be neutral. He didn't say should not be neutral, he said they cannot be neutral. We already discussed that here. And we agree. That part we agree. They cannot be. You try to be, you fail every time. Again, because education is political. Education is political. It's a government. You have to vote people in who control it. The teachers' unions are political super PACs, leftists, decidedly neo-Marxists. Okay? So, on that point, we agree. So, to continue, quote, Giroux extended Freire's idea to address feminism, racism, social justice in United States schools. This evolution further emphasized the role of education in ideological struggle and social transformation. By embedding Freire theory in the American social and cultural context, Giroux helped establish its permanence in American academia. Okay? Giroux, quote, Giroux is credited with popularizing the term critical pedagogy and spent much of his career developing a critical theory and practice of education applicable to conditions in the contemporary United States, although I think he's a Canadian. Along with scholars such as Peter McLaren, Donald McKay, and Ira Shaw, Giroux's efforts introduced Freire's ideas into teachers' colleges, K-12 classrooms, and universities, where future educators learn that their purpose is not merely to teach, but to confront and dismantle systems of oppression in pursuit of justice. They go on to point out where their ideas show up. We've already discussed some of that in a previous video. They go on to point out some of the centers that bear Freire's name and legacy. We did discuss some of that. They then continue to say, quote, Freire's teachings are not confined to theory. In other words, these are not ideas that are just stuck in the ivory towers being thrown back and forth, ping pong back and forth in academic papers and peer-reviewed journals. No. These are on the ground. They are not confined to theory. Quote, graduates of teachers' preparation programs often bring these ideas into action in K-12 classrooms. In the Los Angeles Unified School District, for example, Freire is mentioned over 60 times in various documents available on their website, often in reference to public charter schools in the district. One example appears in an application for a charter school in East Los Angeles in a section titled Critical Theory. Quote, as a school community, we have the responsibility to constantly improve that which we have created. The school community has the ability to see both what is and what ought to be. That reminds me of Kamala Harris.
I can imagine what can be and be unburdened by what has been.
To live ethically is to participate in conscious transformation of our social reality to promote toward a greater equity, inclusion, justice, and peace.
What can be unburdened by what has been.
Right. Some K-12 schools are dedicated to Freire's approach that they are named for him. Philadelphia is home to the Freire Charter Middle and High School, where the philosophy is we are all dragons and we must breathe fire. In the Freire tradition, these schools design their classes to engage students deeply with their learning and bring to life connection between students, classwork, their communities, and real-world issues. Arizona is home to two public Paulo Freire freedom schools that prioritize a curricular focus on social justice and environmental sustainability and culturally relevant practices according to the schools. According to the schools, culture is not just what we do, it's how we learn, with a focus on decreasing inequitable learning outcomes. Yeah, so they're going to talk about curriculum developers. Okay. Freire's theory, but by now that should be clear, of course. But, quote, Freire's theory is further institutionalized by graduates of teacher preparation programs who join with education advocacy organizations to develop, distribute curricula that embed his ideas in K-12 classrooms. These curriculum developers reinforce a cycle in which political activism is framed as education itself, ensuring that Freire's framework continues to shape what and how students learn. So we can go on and on and on. We can connect a lot of the dots that are there to connect. For example, Howard Zinn is mentioned. Howard Zinn is another one of those wicked men who wrote a bad history book of America that is used in some of these institutions. We can go on and on. We can as you can imagine, I don't want to go any longer than I have already. But as you can imagine, this guy is highly influential. Okay, his work is responsible for a lot of the damage, but we argue that this is inevitable. That's the point. That's the point to take on. This is inevitable. The system was set to bring these kind of things about and to become at least a battleground. Whoever has the culture gets to educate the future generations. If you have the kind of system of education such as we have today, and these people have worked hard because they managed to discredit Christianity and push Christianity out of the public square, and secular humanism entered, and secular humanism became the perfect vehicle and container for all these wickedness. Because secular humanism is not rooted in any real concrete worldview, truth. It's a worldview, but it's as some philosophers would say, it has its feet planted in thin air. So it has to latch on all these things. And whatever is the most working the hardest, that's who gets to rule the day. as I said in my previous video, one of the ways that critical pedagogy is disseminated today is through social and emotional learning, which they are now calling transformative social and emotional learning. But again, the system is bound to go this way. One other thing I want to say about Paulo Freire that people do not realize sometimes, and this is shout out to James Lindsay. Paulo Freire is a liberation theologian. So he blends he blends the themes, the Christian themes, and Marxist social analysis and progressive education. His kind of education philosophy is very much rooted in a religion. It's a false religion. It's Marxism, but a religion nonetheless, which is why he believes rightly that education cannot be neutral. And these are the guys like Henry Giroux will say the same thing. So parents, please, pastors, right? If I can get through to some pastors, I really, I'm nobody in the game. I'm just a guy behind the camera in my attic, right? But if I can get through to a pastor and say, please look these things up. Please educate yourself on this subject of education. Please look close to what is being taught and how it's being taught in the school narrative. If you want to go and become a member of the school board, if you want to go and engage with the school, that's fine. But please know that that's not good enough. It's just not. The system is not designed for children who are coming from a Christian household. The system is designed to undermine you, the leadership at your church, the people who are involved in discipleship, and the parents themselves. And the system spends way more time with them. History will record up to this point that this has not been sustainable, and we have to do something different. These people, the ones that will replace them, will be even worse. And fine, you can try and reform some of it, but eventually it's bound to go back in this direction. If you look throughout the history, that's what you'll find. Go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, because it's a political arena. What we want to do is reclaim it as a ministry of the local church, with the family at the forefront, but with the local church community right there to support them. I think there should be conferences all over the place, pastors' conferences, trying to strategize how we will do this. Missions are fine. All these other initiatives are great, but they are really for free if we're going to keep sending our children to these people to educate. These are godless, antichrist people. So what worth is it if we go and win a few Muslims over there in the Middle East? So go and win a few Asians over there in China, while our children here at home are being trained to join the enemy's side. It's time to do something different. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I'm gonna link these things in the description. I'm gonna link my previous video that I did, this article, and please, if you watch this far, if you listen this far, please consider subscribing and share this message with a pastor. I want pastors to hear this. share with a parent, if you will, and let's get this message going. I will see you on the flip side. Thank you.